This next session is going to focus on police vetting, delivering that blueprint for reform. So we're going to welcome to the stage Chief Constable Alex Franklin-Smith, who's the lead for police vetting, and Superintendent Ross Campbell, the staff officer to the police vetting lead from Warwickshire. Put your hands together.
Okay. Excuse me. So, very good morning, everyone. Thank you, firstly, for the invite to share with you the journey we're on collectively around vetting, police vetting. So, as I've just been introduced, I'm Alex Franklin-Smith, Chief Constable of Warwickshire, so I didn't have too far to travel this morning. I'm joined by Ross Campbell. Ross is a bit of a double act, so Ross will join me when I hand over. I've had this portfolio just coming up to shy of 12 months, so I absolutely don't stand here professing to be an expert in vetting. Ross, however, has been supporting the portfolio for over a decade, so I think it's probably fair to say he is far more of an expert than I am. But between us, what we want to do is just share with you I guess some of it at a relatively high level in terms of where police vetting is coming from, but more importantly, where we're trying to get to. Some of the challenges, but I guess importantly, to share with you as senior leaders across UK policing, where we are trying to take police reform around this particular topic, because it is going to require all of us to play our part. Okay, so I'm not for 1 minute saying that policing and all police forces have been life on Mars, but when Ross and I sit down and look at vetting as a framework, it has changed and is continuing to change at quite some pace. The current vetting framework was first introduced over 2 decades ago, 20 years, and I'm sure we can all agree the landscape within which we operate, the makeup of our respective workforces, the various policing demands and challenges upon our people has changed considerably. When vetting was first introduced, it focused far more on systems, assets, buildings, and less so public safety. And as we all know, in quite recent years, we've had a number of high-profile cases that have put vetting and vetting practices into the spotlight. I'd probably also say this is a topic that has been in the spotlight in recent years and continues to be so every time we have a high-profile case. There often tends to be lots of so-called experts out there, and often I feel that vetting is confused with other aspects of traditional police recruitment. It, of course, is an important part of that, but it doesn't just take place at the point that people enter the service, and perhaps therein lies some of the issues that we've found within police vetting in recent times. We're taking it far more to a continuous assessment of someone's character and integrity. And we're also very much trying to move away from being purely reactive. As you know, there have been many inquiries, some of which we'll touch on and go into a bit of detail, and get into a position where we're far more proactive, and all of us and all of those around policing can have far more confidence in vetting practices. So the challenge to respond. I would say confidently, as the MPCC lead for this portfolio, we do feel the pressure from many angles, those being recent inquiries and ongoing inquiries. We've got the Angelini inquiry, which we'll come on to. Part 1 has taken place, but we've still got Part 2 and 3 to be published. We had a HMIC thematic inspection just a few years back, which, as a result of that, from which followed many recommendations for policing, but a good chunk of those were specifically for vetting. The media continue to be very interested in this particular topic, as do the public and MPCC as a body. As I said, we're trying to move away from being purely reactive and constantly responding to inquiries and recommendations and move it more to a proactive approach. And I can confidently say that we are now very much in the process of delivering vetting reform, and both Ross and myself, together with the many partners that we work closely with, are trying to keep the work in that particular space rather than continually looking backwards. We thought it would be helpful to share here some of the detail of the Di Maria ruling. So, as some of you hopefully know, there was a judicial review, and that was in relation to a sergeant called Sergeant Di Maria in the Metropolitan Police, who had been exited by that organisation under their Operation Assure programme, which was part of their work around vetting. I just want to go through some of the detail in respect of that, because I think it will carry relevance for quite some time. It certainly was seen as a landmark ruling for policing, and it does impact on all police forces, but it's also being seen as impacting on many of the other public sector partners that we work closely with. At that point in time, the view was that it now removed the ability for chief constables to dismiss officers who fail their vetting. And you may recall, very shortly after the ruling, Sir Mark Rowley, Met Commissioner, spoke quite passionately around his frustrations with the inability to remove officers who had failed vetting. There was a view from within that ruling that performance regulations were not the appropriate mechanism for dismissals. Article 6, human rights concerns, which primarily were around individuals who were dismissed, were not being given a fair opportunity to put their side of the story across, which of course is incredibly important. And I should say, we are absolutely not looking at vetting purely through a lens of seeking to identify wrongdoing and dismiss people. Equally important, and I think this is really, really important for all of us, is to make sure that we identifying the right people, operating with information that we can have confidence in, and ensuring that proportionate decisions are made. In my experience in policing across 23 years, quite often we don't like that grey area. We tend to lurch from one end of the spectrum to the other. So we are absolutely not saying that vetting needs to improve, needs to reform, and therefore we need to go to the other end of the spectrum, because we will get it completely wrong. And we are aware of some cases around the country. People do approach us with concerns, and that is where the appeal framework is really important. The screen's gone off. Oh, it's come back. The ruling is directly relevant to police officers, but it is important to say that we're also looking at this in terms of police staff. Regulations are different for officers and staff, but some of the findings within the ruling, the JR ruling, do relate to police staff. So this is our entire workforce we are looking at. I've talked about potential wider impact on other vetting authorities. Basically, we mean other partners that we work closely with. And what I'll come on to now is that as a result of that ruling, there was huge concern within policing that what do we do now? Particularly within the Met, they had a huge number of officers subject to the Operation Assure programme. The Met Commissioner had spoken, as I say, quite passionately and loudly around he must have the ability to deal with individuals who have failed their vetting. So that gave cause to a lot of pressure placed on the Home Office to fast-track introducing new police vetting regulations, which were brought in on the 12th of May. Some statutory guidance has been circulated. Ross and I have worked quite closely, as have the College of Policing, with various staff associations, and clearly today we're talking with the Superintendents Association. A number of concerns have been raised around the speed in which those regulations have been brought in, some concerns around the clarity of what a number of elements of those regulations mean, and how, I guess, importantly, those regulations are going to be applied in practice, so that we do get consistent application of the new vetting APP, and we do, most importantly, get consistent decision making. We share those concerns, and that is why we are working closely with all the staff associations and the Home Office, and the Policing Minister and the Home Secretary and MPCC and all the other bodies and partners you would expect us to be working closely with, including IOPC, to make sure that we are getting this right. Okay, Angelini inquiry. As I briefly referenced earlier, part one has been published. Part one focused on examining Wayne Couzens, his career, his previous behaviour, information that was known to the organisations that he worked in. Wayne Couzens was, of course, the officer who murdered Sarah Everard. Since that event, Gavin Stevens, chair of MPCC, has set up a gold group called Operation Standards. That meets every month. It's got myself, Ross, and various other portfolio holders reporting into it. Part one resulted in 16 recommendations across a number of thematic areas. 8 of those were specifically for police vetting, and there's 37 sub-recommendations, all of which were accepted in full on the day that the part one was published. Gavin continues to meet with the parents of Sarah Everard, so clearly I think that shows he's taking a very personal role in keeping them updated on the progress that the service is making. And those recommendations build on the 43 recommendations. We like recommendations, don't we? There's lots and lots of recommendations, hence my point earlier that we want to get to a point where we are delivering meaningful police reform rather than continually responding to recommendations. But that was 43 recommendations from the HMIC thematic inspection in 2022 into vetting misconduct and misogyny. Now, huge progress has been made around that, and I can confidently say that, but we are not there yet. There are some elements of the recommendations that are incredibly complex, and to be quite frank, and I've had quite frank conversations at Operation Standards around, we are not going to stand here and give assurance and sign off recommendations that we don't believe are fully there. Ross will come on to some of the detail, and that might be an area that we want to have a conversation around in the Q&A in due course. I think at that point I'll hand over to Ross, who will talk in more detail around the Angelini Part 1 recommendation update, and then I'll come back in due course.
Thank you. Hear me okay? Good. Yeah, I've been doing this portfolio for 10 years, so when I started it, I looked young and fresh, so it's had that impact. But it's been right to have the scrutiny over that period of time, which is why Alex has said it's really important that whilst we deal with the recommendations, we're identifying the reforms that need to take place to make vetting fit for the future, modern reform in line with the other reform requirements. So I'm just going to touch very briefly on the Angelini recommendations. Now, as I go through this, I'll throw some numbers at you because I'm not going to put the recommendations in full on the screen because they're quite wordy. It's just a very high-level overview of where we've come. And really good progress has been made. 67% in total of the vetting regulations, so those are the 37 sub-recommendations, have been delivered or closed. So that's really good progress in quite a short period of time, and has involved a lot of work to get to that point. This obviously leaves, for those of you who are good at maths, 33% which are undelivered, and that's very much due to the complexity around them, or as Alex has said, those ones that we're not quite sure that we need to deliver them in the way that they've been prescribed because it's probably not the right thing to do. We need to understand what the intentions of the recommendation were in order for us to understand what it is that they're trying to achieve. And a lot of those focus around those recommendations are around information sharing, which we know is really difficult and problematic across policing and other organisations, but also psychological considerations. This is the first time within policing we've been asked to really look at a person's motivations and behaviours. And there just isn't the evidence base there across the UK around how to do that. And we could pick an off-the-shelf product up now to say that we're going to deliver that recommendation, but it's absolutely not the right thing to do. We need to give consideration to all of the factors, and we've talked about academia over the past couple of days and the importance of that evidence base, which we're trying to identify to understand what we need to do in that space. So this isn't just around the delivery of those recommendations. It's fundamentally around reform and the building blocks in order for us to build an effective and efficient vetting system for the future. One of the big things that we're focusing on is the continuous integrity screening programme. So that followed the historical data wash. So Amanda Blakeman has just taken over from Serena Kennedy in the community safety portfolio, leading that work, and that's looking at the washing of PND data to have that continual assessment and cycle of somebody's footprint and trace on PND, which might not be ordinarily known to police forces, which is a really important piece of work. Recommendation 8 looks around vetting, recruitment and policy processes. Alex mentioned the fact that often vetting and recruitment are conflated. They are absolutely not the same thing. They're both really important aspects, but separate parts of the pre-employment jigsaw. We need to bring them more closely together and more closely aligned. And there's lots of work that goes hand in hand with our portfolio and Jason Hogg's workforce development coordination, which develops where the overlaps between recruitment and vetting are. 8A and F are around psychological considerations, which I talked about. We've got a well-established working group which has been in place for the past 14, 15 months, which is looking at long-term work around psychological assurance of recruitment and selection processes, but also what we can do in the short term. And one thing that's really important is identifying psychological well-being. We've talked about the importance of well-being, and that's really a key theme around our vetting reform, is making sure that we're identifying where people need support, not penalisation, which is really important for us. We've got recommendation 11A, which is around the recording of vetting failures, which again is important. If somebody fails vetting as a recruit, if they're applying to, I don't know, Warwickshire as we're here, there wouldn't necessarily be a trace on the system if they applied to the Met tomorrow. So we need to ensure that we use technology in our case management system effectively to identify those flags. And we need to develop a shared referencing protocol across law enforcement, uniformed services and the military to allow more holistic information to be shared across those agencies. So if somebody's coming from the prison service, for example, we currently have really difficulty in getting anything other than what I call a vanilla reference. Somebody was employed between X date and Y date. They don't give us any information around any conduct history or anything like that, which is significantly important for us to know. Policing, we put our hands up. We don't particularly do that well either the other way. So we need to develop something long-term around the sharing of information, that holistic view, that holistic risk management, and that understanding of somebody's drivers, motivators, and behaviours, which the vetting regime that is currently in place, as Alex said earlier, was never designed to do. So that's Angelini in a nutshell, and I'll pass back to Alex to talk about some of the change.
Thanks, Ross. So, building the case for change. We were really conscious that if we were going to set off on a journey to bring about meaningful vetting reform, you can't just have Alex and Ross deciding how they think's the best way to do it. That would probably be quite dangerous. So, and also, if we are going to get meaningful reform delivered, we need the full weight of key players. So one of those is, of course, MPCC. Ross and I presented at Chiefs Council back in, I think, March time this year, and all the chiefs that were there had about an hour presentation from us setting out the case for change, which we want to share with you, and I'll hand back to Ross shortly to share what those findings look like. But suffice to say, everyone in that room was content that, one, reform is required, and two, the plans will bring about meaningful change. I'm not for 1 minute standing here saying it's easy. Some of it will require quite significant support in forms of technology. Things like open source, social media, huge amounts of data and information. And let's not forget, ultimately, vetting is managed by people, human beings making professional judgment decisions on the risk that an individual poses. We, of course, want to get to a position where we can have the highest levels of confidence that every vetting unit across police forces and across our partners who we're working closely with have got the support, the framework, the tools, the equipment to ensure that they are consistently applying APP for vetting. And as I said earlier, most importantly, getting the right proportionate and consistent decision-making at every point. I think the case for change that Ross will share with you will probably shock you a little bit. We were certainly a little bit shocked in terms of how inconsistent some of the practices were, how different forces take different approaches to how they structure their vetting, how different forces decide on who will make the decision on vetting, how appeal forums are structured and who sits in those appeal forums. And again, let's not forget, we're talking about people's livelihoods. So you have to get this right. And that applies to people at the very start of a potential career, i.e. when they're joining policing, but it's no different to people who may be halfway through their career. We also, within MPCC, Warwickshire hosts the National Contractor Vetting Scheme. So there are many thousands of contractors that work within and around policing also go through a form of police vetting. So it's incredibly important that we are getting this right. In terms of building the case for change, as you would expect and hope, we've gone into significant detail looking at processes, structures. We have, where it carries benefits, brought in academia. We've also worked with some commercial companies, one being Process Evolution, who I think are actually exhibiting here at the conference. And that, together with lots and lots and lots of consultation with people who work, most importantly, work within vetting, practitioners, managers, supervisors, and various layers of leadership across policing, including staff associations, is why we stand here, particularly confident, I guess, when we stand in front of the Ministerial Oversight Board, which is the highest level of governance for this particular area, to be able to say this is the right direction of travel, and we do believe it is going to close the gaps that currently exist. So, to take you through the case for change, I would ask you to really, this is probably the most important bit, I think, because it shows you where we've been, where the gaps are, and therefore why we think reform is so important.
Thank you. I'm mindful we're on the final straight now, so I've got lots of colours, lots of graphics, so hopefully it'll keep you a little bit engaged as we push through towards the end of the day. So in June 2024, we commissioned some work through Process Evolution, who are really well tried and tested in this kind of arena, doing this kind of work, using 6 sample vetting units across 8 forces, because one of them was a joint one. They were a mix of urban, rural, metropolitan collaboration, so we've got a broad mix. And I have no doubt, although this is only a synopsis of 6 forces, having done this job for the length of time I've done it, what we have found here will absolutely be apparent in all of the other force vetting units. So the Commission had a few aims. It was to provide a baseline of evidence across the Police Service of England and Wales around current capacity, utilisation rates within vetting units and efficiency across each service. We looked to process map the requirements of the APP, which is the processes that we follow to do vetting. Perform some gap analysis where we've overlaid the current APP to the new APP that came out last year, because we knew that was going to have some change. And that ultimately provides us with the evidence base to assess the impact of all of this and what the impact in the future would be around some of the changes that we need to make off the back of the recommendations and the inquiries. Then we also incorporated some scenario modelling at the end, which has certainly helped our reform work. Now, don't necessarily need to see the details of what's in these boxes. It's just a really good illustration to show you in a process map the end-to-end process of what a vetting check, a vetting application consists of. The dark blue processes are the kind of admin tasks at the beginning. Now, the big important bit is the green bit in the middle, which is 24, 25 tasks which have to be completed. We currently rely on people doing those checks manually. So there's 24, 25 checks in the middle, which are PNC, PND, intelligence systems, out-of-force checks. You can look at them on there. The orange is the decision-making bit, so you can see there's not a huge amount in that decision-making space. The light blue is some more admin at the end of the decision. Pink is where appeals take place, and then the blue at the end is some more admin at the end of the process. And it's really useful to see this, to see that actually when we're relying on manual processes and people doing these checks, there's so much inefficiency in that because every single person is double, triple, quadruple keying a lot of the time, and it's really been our frustration in able to leverage some of the technology that we require in this space, and it's certainly laid out very, very clearly the complexity of what one vetting check looks like. So we know from this work that approximately 80% of a vetting practitioner's time is spent in the research phase and 20% in decisions. We absolutely fundamentally need to flip that on its head. So when we look at comparing case times across those forces, we see a range of case times when we analyse the force data and how long it takes to complete applications. This graphic shows each vetting level, so there's recruit vetting, management vetting, and then the non-police personnel vetting levels. And then it shows the average time for each check within each force that has been used for the data. So from this, that we can see the differences are stark. Recruit vetting is your most typical vetting level that most people are vetted to. The quickest force completes this clearance in 4.1 hours, and the slowest is 15.1. So that's a significant gap, and there's significant variance across all of those forces, as you can see from that graphic if you just focus on that RV chart. You'll note that I've avoided using the word most efficient because we're not saying that the quickest is the most efficient. So we need to use this data, and we need to look a little bit more deeply into it to understand actually what goes on at a more detailed level around why things are taking, what time they take within each force. And we need to identify what good looks like from that. Where a force ranks in terms of the time taken to complete clearance is generally consistent across the board, across the range of vetting levels with some slight variances. But the interesting bit is that no force is anywhere near the average time that it should take to complete the check. So if you look at RV, it's 9.5 hours that the average should take, and forces are either really quick or really slow. And that was not what we expected to see. So that certainly shows us the inconsistency in a force. And as people that we need to get people in through the door, you can see where some of the frustrations lie, where some forces are slower than others. If we dive down at another level into the intelligence check timing, so this is using PNC and PND, again you can see the variances across all of those key intelligence checks, the bread and butter checks that take place to check somebody's kind of history. 6.10 hours to less than an hour around those checks. Again, it's really stark. 90 minutes versus 13 for PNC, 135 versus 27 for PND, 165 versus 10 for local intelligence. And Experian isn't on there, but you look between 52 minutes and 5 minutes. This absolutely shows us the discrepancy that there is nationally within the vetting processes. We finally drill down into this more detailed level, which kind of shows all the research element timings as a comparison of receipt, decision, appeal administration. And if we go back to that graphic that I showed you at the beginning with all those green boxes, this provides the evidence of the time spent within each of those stages. This is where the greatest inefficiency sits and where the most efficiency can be drawn out, particularly through technology and innovation, as we talked about, to remove those manual processes and double keying. Forces are under real pressure to deliver vetting as quickly as they can, to meet the demands of recruitment, changes in APP and other pressures, and are often, in many cases, not fairly seen as a blocker for recruitment because there are a whole load of things that stop that. Through many years of work from working closely with HMIC FRS, we know that forces don't properly understand their vetting demand, they don't plan effectively to manage it, and they don't plan effectively to deliver it. And they're delivering it through manual processes which need streamlining and need reform. We need vetting to remain robust enough to prevent letting the people in that we shouldn't be letting in, or to remain in service that shouldn't be. But equally, it needs to be efficient and effective enough that we can be able to focus our time more predominantly on decision making. A correlation could be drawn from this data and the inefficiencies that are created through the inconsistent structures, because every force has a different structure, and that again is part of our work to look to make sure that structures are more consistent. The work moved on to building some scenario modelling, which looked at different kind of hypothetical situations. How much more time was it going to take if we were looking at the new APP? How much time would it look at if we were looking at one vetting level, which is one of the change pieces that we're looking at? What would the impact of automation be, and what's the impact of additional abstraction? And ultimately, when we identify this, every constituent part of the new requirements of APP is requiring more work within vetting units who are already stretched. This is why it's key to drive efficiency through reform. We've done this modelling, which has started to identify that if you take time out of manual processes, so assume that you can automate 60, 90, 120 minutes, you can start to see that actually that allows you more ability to focus that or do that flip between decision making and research. So when we're looking at efficiency within vetting units, we're not talking about reducing the number of people within vetting units. It's about having enough staff to meet the modern demands of police vetting, have the time to consider all of the risks and make documented decisions that can stand up to scrutiny. The plans that we have for the future of vetting allow for staff to have the capacity to do that through automation of manual processes in the middle, whilst creating time savings compared to the way that we currently do things. Now, quickly moving on to decision making. We've never gone into so much depth previously around all of that analysis around how vetting works nationally within force vetting units. And we did some work to identify how we make decisions within police vetting. Again, we need to develop the evidence base and understand how decision making works. We knew from the HMIC FRS inspection that it was inconsistent decisions being made nationally, and I worked with a colleague from North Yorkshire Police to create a really deep, broad understanding of decision making across the country, and again, a really rich picture to identify how decisions are made. About 200 practitioners took part in this. Some people in this room might have done it within the Professional Standards Forum that we did this in. And I'd like to point out that when I kind of show you the results, this isn't for every single decision that's made nationally. This is around some of the complex decisions. But these are the complex decisions which are really challenging around people's lives and lifestyles and family setups and family arrangements. And they're the things that are the most impactful on them if you get the decision wrong. So we had 5 case studies. In essence, again, you can have a quick look at some of the detail. They were paper feeds, so we kind of gave some information, gave a little bit more, but this was in essence the decision making that was being tested. Case study 1 was a police officer applicant with historical rape allegation 9 years previously. No other matters against them, and it came down to a matter of consent within the crime report. Case study 2 is a police officer candidate estranged from family who are involved in criminality but live outside of the force area. They don't have any contact with them, and they had low-level juvenile criminality on her. Case study 3 was a transferee applicant, single-strand anonymous intelligence claiming they were having an inappropriate workplace relationship. And I think we find that actually some allegations like that can be made that are relevant and some are spurious. We know that there are some difficult situations that police officers, particularly senior leaders, find themselves in where allegations might be made against them, whether they are true or not. But this was a single strand in like Crime Stoppers piece of intelligence. Case study 4 was a police staff applicant with declared associates around OCG and drugs. And case study 5 was a police staff applicant with financial defaults and quite a lot of debt. You'll have developed in your own minds probably if you would initially think clear or not clear. We're not going to play the clear or no clear game, but I will show you what the results were. But you'll have formed your opinions in your mind around what you might do in those cases. These 2 graphs show the results from 2 key forums, the Vetting Symposium, which is a practitioners' conference, and the PSD conference, which was for PSD leads. The PSD conference only had 2 case studies due to the time restraints of the session, but it does provide some comparable analysis between case studies 1 and 3. Graph 1 shows a 50-50 split. So half would, half wouldn't accept that individual for the rape NFA case. Case study 2, which was the estranged family member, is a bit clearer cut, but still a 20% decline rate. Case study 3, which was the ACU investigation. Remember, this is a single strand piece of intelligence. Again, shows a split. And the SOCO with the family links to criminality shows a little bit of a difference in those results, and the most clear-cut was the financial one. There's clearly a difference in the risk tolerance at a strategic level within PSDs, who are more likely to be the decision makers or the final appeal body for some of these decisions around the same set of circumstances, with less risk being taken around the NFA rape than there is around the ACU investigation, where a decision to grant is more likely at that level than it is at the practitioner level. So again, this shows the disparity around decision making, and we need to ask ourselves the questions through our reform work, how we can make decision making more consistent, because at the end of the day, it's people's lives that we're looking at, and we can't have a postcode lottery around the way decisions are made. Alex.
Thanks, Ross. Okay, just quickly on that. I mean, hopefully you can see that level of disparity is just way too big. And within those case studies, we've got vetting practitioners who do this day in, day out, and vetting decision makers too. So that said to us, it was quite clear, particularly with the new vetting regs that have now been brought up, that have absolutely upped the stakes, because people will lose their jobs statutorily as part of those regs if they are deemed not to be fit to carry vetting. So that's why I guess we keep labouring the point around, in really simple terms, where we want to get to is all of us collectively having confidence that vetting application is consistent, but most importantly, the decision making is. So we're just going to come on to now, in the time we've got left, to talk with you around some of the specifics in terms of the reform. We do believe it's a once-in-a-generation opportunity to get this right. We don't think as a service we can continue to lurch from one inquiry to another and one set of recommendations to another, which is why we are really keen to operate at pace. We feel like we've always got a small window of appetite, both politically, but also within policing as well, before the next big thing comes along. I do feel, and have done for the last 12 months, felt that MPCC is right behind this portfolio of work, but I'm not naive to appreciate there are lots of other demands, one significant one being the excellent talk you had before we landed on the stage. So MPCC is working very, very closely with the College of Policing. We've put a team together that takes away any kind of silo working. So Ross and a group of very much vetting experts at the college work closely together as one. We're also working with the likes of UKSV and various other government departments who are also doing a lot of work around vetting, and quite often police vetting links in to other roles, be it military or security services, etc. So that's another reason why we have to get our part of the process absolutely right. In terms of governance, your senior leaders, you would expect us to have strategic, tactical groups with all the appropriate representation that meets frequently. But we also now have a ministerial oversight group, which is chaired by two very senior ministers who've got responsibilities for UK security. Must be around about 20 different agencies that are represented there. So that's particularly helpful for us as well, because they will spot opportunities for us to be able to make greater progress too. It's also meant that we've been able to tap into much needed funding. When I picked this portfolio up, it was pretty much Ross on his own as the only person full-time, which is ludicrous, to be quite frank, given the scale of the work that needs to happen. And of course, now we've got support from Chiefs Council and at ministerial level. All of the pressure is on. So where have you got to? What are your key dates for delivering X, Y, and Z? We've got a number of work streams. I'm sure we can break out some of this stuff and share it more widely, so you've got the detail within the slides, because I'm conscious some of this, given the time we've got, is relatively high level. But I touched on technology earlier. That is going to be a really key part. We're trying to get to a position where we can go to the market as one MPCC, because there's lots of portfolios that are going to rely on technology. Firearms licensing is another clear one that relies on, you could argue, vetting of an individual and the risks they pose and whether or not they are safe to carry or retain a firearm. So we need to do that in a sensible and proportionate way and to get the best value for the public purse. Just before I finally hand over to Ross to go through some of the specifics on the vetting reform in terms of areas of focus, some people have said to us, why don't you just get rid of 43 vetting units? Just do it once, do it nationally. That's a far simpler way to do it. And it's a fair argument, but we, as the portfolio holders, are yet to be convinced that that is the most effective way to do it. So just some of the reasons for that. We believe chief constables are personally responsible for the employment of their people. You could change the legislation, I guess. There is police reform coming. However, vetting is no longer a point-in-time assessment. It's a continuous assessment of someone's character and integrity. As you've seen, vetting is not simply a number of transactions, but that ongoing review. And the importance of local decision-making and the landscape and local operating environment that individuals are operating within is really important, because we believe a lot of vetting decisions that result in failure of vetting, actually more work could be done around mitigating those risks. Probably a lot of that is at the front end when we're looking to recruit people, but not enough work, in our opinion, is being done to explore measures that you could deploy to mitigate the associated risks. That said, we do believe there is a role for a national function within vetting, and that forms part of the reform work that we are doing, and probably a little bit like the work that Ross has just shared with you, getting to a stage where we can do that as a continuous assessment so that collectively we've got assurance in our vetting practices. So just to finish off, Ross will go into a bit more detail, and then we'll get into the Q&A.
So I will skip through this because I've only got a couple of minutes left to leave time for questions and answers. But in essence, the so what, all of that, what does that mean? Broken it down into 4 key areas across these 2 slides. The main one, which is quite a significant change for us, is the removal of 2 levels of vetting for policing. So you currently have recruit vetting and management vetting. We're looking to develop a new baseline of vetting. So that's 1 level to replace the both, to give more of an enhanced level of vetting at the outset. This won't be either RV or MV, but will contain some of the MV level checks, particularly around financial vulnerability. And we'll look to develop national assurance measures when people are moving roles or departments to get more of a holistic look into that individual. We've just signed off some work nationally to start to develop a comprehensive structured interview for recruits, transferees and internal moves, which will look at values and behaviours, which is designed by the college and psychologists at the college to start to look at a person's behaviours and suitability for certain roles. We absolutely need to sort out the consistency around decision making, so we will develop a national decision making framework, which again will be academically supported in order to ensure that consistency. We look at how we can better use interviews and aid the assessment process around interviews for vetting, and we ensure that we use the technology available to us through case management systems to be able to share holistic risks, as well as needing to support and get support around the requirement to deliver technological change, which is fundamentally important to drive the efficiencies. We talked about national coordination, which will sit at the centre, looking at how we deliver performance, how we assess the strategic threat and risk nationally around vetting, the cultural change, the stakeholder management, training, CPD, quality and standardisation. That absolutely has to be driven centrally. And psychometric testing we talked about is a piece of work we're about to start with Bournemouth University. Dr. Faye Sweeting, who's quite renowned in this space around police perpetrated violence. We're looking at some work around how we can look at psychological testing within policing to develop a kind of acknowledgement of people's traits that you can't see, but you can identify through psychological screening. And I'll leave you with this. This is a word cloud that I use in a few presentations, which actually shows how broad and complex vetting is. And I think it's worthy of a reflection of where we are now and how our work is focusing on all of these areas. These are all things that are seen as vetting, and they might not all be vetting, but they're that holistic risk management. And one thing is really clear, that all of these constituent parts make vetting everybody's responsibility. No longer is it a snapshot in time. No longer does it sit in a unit that just does vetting. It has to be a holistic view of an individual, where all departments work together to share information and concerns to join up the dots that have been identified as not being done through those inquiries that we have seen. Alex, you want to say anything else to just conclude? No. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour of our work.
Yeah.